In this video, I will go over a code review that will show my skills in software engineering and design, algorithms and data structures, and databases. So I'll start out with software engineering and design. So this is my own personal project called D20Chat. It's made specifically with tabletop gamers in mind. One of the biggest problems that they have, me personally, and a lot of the people I play with, is the inability to essentially act like you never heard something happen. That, you know, something spoken in one language in game um, isn't spoken by your character. But when the DM says it out loud, it's hard to just act like you didn't hear it, right? So this web app will allow a game manager, to get on and create their own chat room that will encompass everybody in the game, allow them to specify the emails of the people who can play the game, their character names, the languages they speak, and can then speak certain phrases in certain languages. And the messages will be disseminated out to the users, um, either in an encrypted language if they don't speak the language, or the language that it's spoken, or the language that it's typed if they do speak the language. So the only way you'll see the actual message is if you speak the language. So you'll see here that I utilize HTML. I also use CSS for all of my styling, and JavaScript for my advanced features for some extra functionality here. One of the biggest challenges that I had in the get-go was how I wanted to actually send messages, actually do the the chat room style website, and I settled on using Node.js for my server. So Node.js allows me to use server-side JavaScript, and specifically use the Node package manager, npm, to use socket.io, which allows me to have a user log on, connect to a socket, and I can send messages back and forth with that socket. So that's sort of the functionality of the website. It's pretty bare bones. It's you go there and there's a login. You can sign up for an account. Once you log in, it generates the rooms, and it any rooms you're in, I should say, generates any rooms you're in, and allows you to navigate between the rooms, send messages in certain languages, create your own rooms, delete rooms, or delete your presence in the room if you're not the game manager. And this I'm going to use to show my skills with software engineering and design. This is sort of my own little my baby, so to speak. I put a lot of time into this. I put a lot of effort into this, and it's by no means close to being a polished product. And I'll go over what needs to be done and what I plan to do in the future a little bit later. So let's dig into the actual code, and let's look at the code itself. So I'm going to focus a lot on the client-side code, chat.html, and some of the server-side code for this. I'm going to largely ignore the database stuff for now, because I'm going to go over it a little bit later when I'm talking about my database project specifically. I have something in mind for that anyways. So the first thing I want to go over is the actual structure of the code. When I started, I had an idea and I had some basic plans, but I didn't really have a detailed plan about what I wanted to do. And a lot of this came to fruition as I went. Things that I knew I would have to do, things that I discovered I had to do. So there wasn't a whole lot of planning, but what was done was stuck to. The plan right off the bat would be to have a one-page web app that would just refresh and sort of refactor as you go through the code, and that's exactly what I ended up with. So one of the points of improvement here that I could work on is the actual diagramming. So when I went into it, I knew I'm passing messages from from a client to the server, and the server does something with that information and then sends something back. There was no sequence diagram, right? This was something that I worked on as it came up. So one of the things that I definitely plan to do is to actually incorporate a sequence diagram and plan out how I want the messages sent, and then make the code actually reflect that. So the as far as formatting goes, uh, this is good and bad. So lines are kept to smaller length. I don't want there to be any right and left scrolling. I tried to keep lines short. Indentations consistent throughout. I have proper indentation. Nested code blocks are actually indented. You can see there are no duplicates here. Everything that is in line is properly indented. And this is something that I take pride in. This is one of my key points when I'm coding, is I always want to have proper indentation, and I always want to have comments. So indentation is definitely one of the things that I did correct here. Some of these comments are a little off, but so one of the things you'll notice is the formatting, even the mistakes, right? Even things like, so this is a little bit indented further than my variables, right? But it's consistent. So my thing is, some of the formatting is a little off, but for the most part, it's consistent throughout. I have all of my functions are properly indented, the code within them. I have, for the most part, even if there's a mistake, it's similarly formatted. So all this would require is just a simple backspace, right? So as far as naming variables, naming conventions are concerned, this was one of the things I struggled with. So this code in general has a lot of, when we're doing HTML, there's a lot of divs, a lot of classes, IDs, things like that, and it's hard to keep a naming convention, especially when you're working off the cuff. It's hard to keep a naming convention throughout, to have descriptive names that are unique. So there's a lot of let me see if I can find a good example here. There's a lot of good unique names. Div class dropdown, div ID nav buttons, div ID nav bar. But there's also a lot of redundancies. There's a lot of similarities. So let's see if I can find one. I have, so my login there, I have modal SUP, sign up. That's a little vague, right? Modal sup. If I just say that, you won't know what it's pretty hard to decipher. So my naming could definitely use some brushing up here. There's a lot of things. ID add room, but it doesn't specify that it's a modal, right? So add room, if I just said, okay, what section of code has an ID of add room, you won't know whether or not it's a function or whether or not it's a variable. Add room, you could assume would probably be a function. So I could definitely add modal add room or room addition modal, something like that. So my naming could definitely use some work here, especially in my variables. You'll see just in this little section here, I have 4 arrays. One's called rooms, one's called room names, one's room chars, and one is char langs. This could definitely use a little more explanation, right? So I have this first array is an array for all of the user's rooms, any rooms they're in, and then I have an array for the names of the characters in each room. And then I have, or this is the name of the, see, I'm even confusing myself. This is the name of the user's character names by room. And then we have room chars, which is all of the characters in each room. And then I have char langs, which is all the languages spoken by the user's characters in each room. And you can see that is confusing, right? So this is something that I could definitely improve. So the next thing that I want to bring your attention to is my alerts. So you'll see I have a lot of alerts here that I use when I'm working with sockets and I'm sending sockets to the server. I'm sending messages to the server and sending messages from the server back to a client socket. There's a lot of testing as I go. So there's a lot of alert statements here that are just commented out. There's no they were never deleted, they were never logged, they were never tracked. They are just commented out. So this is something that I definitely want to, in the future, add a testing regimen rather than having these alerts here. When I did this with JavaScript, I knew very little about unit testing, and I knew very little about the proper way to do it on a server. And I think it's something that I'm definitely going to tackle in the near future. But for now, these alerts should get logged. These alerts should be deleted, and they should be, or if they're not deleted, at least they should be turned on and utilized in some way, written into a text log or something like that, so that I could actually track what happens every time a user connects. So the next thing I want to look at are my functions. So my functions themselves are pretty spot on. When it comes to Node, the socket functions, you have socket.emits, which will emit a message to the server, and then you have socket.on. And socket.on is a function on its own where, you get a message from the server and it has some internal message. In this case, it's login status. Socket.on is a function that you actually want to write. So I have socket.on functions for each message being sent from the server to the user. And these are all pretty well formatted. So they obviously they're indented a little further than I would like. But they were specifically coded to be as modular as possible. There's some intricacies with JavaScript when it comes to some code further down executing before other code's done. And this is something that we handle with callbacks. So when a callback is necessary, I will use it. But in this case, these are broken down pretty well. They could probably be broken down a little more, and you can see right here a very good example of how complex these alert statements make this look. This is really hard to read just looking at it. And then we have our other on-click functions, things like that to handle button clicks and link clicks. Setting cookies, deleting cookies. So the actual structure of the code itself is fairly strong. This is something that I worked on quite a bit, but I would like to go back and take a look and see if there's anything I can sort of extract from it and put in its own function. Anything else that I can sort of modularize the code with. But these are all just socket on functions. And some of them I could give better names. Generally, rule of thumb for me is if I send a message to the server, like I send the login information to the server, I will parse that information and send back a status. And there might be some information like the login socket.on login status will return all the information that the user entered. And in this case, char creation status just returns a result. Success, name error, which is name error, and lang error, which is lang error. So these are some things that I want to clean up a little bit. And going down, we have just the same thing. We have checking cookies, getting cookies, setting them. Our logout functions, just click functions, and socket.on functions. We have delete room. So this is an example of similar functions that could be sort of combined. So I have a delete room function defined one way, and then I have a del room function defined the other way. So these, one will control the opening of a modal that will give a warning message, hey, do you want to do this? And then when they click a button, I believe it's the close button or the confirm button, then it will either delete the whole room if they're the GM, or it will actually delete your character from the room. But these I can combine into one function. This won't be too hard, but this is one of the things that I ran into that I would like to go back and fix for this to show my abilities with software engineering and design. Then down here we just have some functions to decide the width and height of every modal, of every dialogue, things like that. These are all just basic formattings. So as far as documentation is concerned, you'll see that up here in my HTML, I have comments saying what each section is, but not every section, right? So when I have them, it looks like I have them at every large intersection. So room deletion modal, login modal, each individual modal. But when it comes to the actual page itself, like the sidebar, the nav bar, things like that, I don't have comments in there. So they're messy and they're sporadic. But what I do have is consistent with the code that is there. Again, I'm describing the modal that comes after it. A little bit further down, let's find one on a function, and this is what I'm talking about. Few and far between. So like room creation functions describes the next few functions alone, but doesn't describe each one on their own, right? So that's something that I want to go back and add some more in-depth comments, and that's something I've already been working on that I'll show soon. So again, I've already gone over the variables. Some of them I want to go through and make sure they're all uniquely named, that there's no duplicates, that there's nothing too confusing, that everything is very descriptive. And so yeah, so that's the client code. I'll go over the server code now. So when it comes to the server code, it's pretty much the same deal. So the server code, it runs on a Linux server that I set up through DigitalOcean. And what it does is it just sits there and it waits for a user's computer to connect, and a socket connects. And what it will do is it parses the messages that are sent to it. So what I'll have is I'll have functions that will handle, let's say, I have on a connect, they will, let's see if I can find some socket.ons here, function right here. So get messages, check login, things like that. These are messages that are sent to the server from the client with other information. Sent to the server. Server handles any calculations or any sort of parsing of information it needs to do. In this case, what I'm doing is I'm querying a database to see if they entered an email that exists. If they did, if I get some result, then I will hash their password according to my own standards that I won't get too far into because I don't want anybody to watch this and be able to get in. I'll hash it in some way and compare. And if they entered the correct password, then I will do things like logging in, returning all the rooms that they're in, all the characters that they are a part of. I will join their socket to rooms, things like that. So this is what the server takes care of. Now, one of the big things with this code is are the comments. So there are comments in here that I have a couple. You'll see variables right here that are just floating out in space. They're not doing anything. These don't need to be here. My comments are sporadic, right? I still have some console logs that I used here for testing. There's quite a few problems with the server that I would like to clean up. The code, at least, it works, but the code itself I would like to clean up. But as far as code formatting goes, everything's properly indented. Naming conventions are much better on this side because of it's a lot easier when you have smaller scope. I could use user ID in 3 different functions if I want, as long as they're in their own scope. it sort of keeps things very, very clean. Um, some of my issues with my functions themselves come down here when I get into my actual login socket functions. I have a lot of code and a lot of nested code that I need to go back and make sure they're all properly nested. You can see these spaces I have 2 spaces between this line and that brace, but there's, 2 between these, but there's this blank line, things like that. Just go through, make sure the code, getting rid of any existing tests that need to go away. There's no test stubs anywhere. I tried to add in, let me see if I can find a good example of it. I added in comments that were to-do comments instead of actual test stubs. And I'm pretty sure I went through and deleted them all. You'll see I have code here that is commented out, not even used, and it's just here. So yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot of little things in here that I could use to clean this up. As far as actual running code goes, this runs. It's been up and online and running, and people have been using it for 13 months, I think now, and it hasn't gone down once. I haven't had any errors, no complaints, so I'm pretty happy with the way it runs. As far as arithmetic operations go, there's really none on the client side, and there's really very few on the server side too. And I'm not using floating points for any of them. All of my rounding and all of those are handled. There's no problems with those. You'll see here, this is probably the only arithmetic I even have, and this is a random. This is a random function to handle encoding of messages to give you a random message back. So, there's not a whole lot going on there. So yeah, I mean, though there's a lot of empty, there's a lot of comments missing, there's a lot of tests in here that haven't been deleted. The code itself, for the most part, the spacing, the naming, the formatting is all pretty solid. Like I said, the only thing that I would really work on, that I really want to work on here, is the actual comments, and I want to go through and see if there's anything I can put into its own function. So when it comes to my, say, reload rooms, I have a lot of callbacks in here, like trimmed langs here is its own function to trim any spaces off of languages. That right there is a good example of separating out code into its own functions, but I would like to go through and actually change some of these to lessen the amount of code in here, like check login. I would like a function, I'm getting my email, but I would like a function that will handle that on its own and just return a result, true or false. And if it's true, I'll check the password as well and pass that off to a function. So I would love the socket.on functions to be shorter and everything else to be handled outside of functions. And for software engineering and design, I feel pretty confident with this. These 2 programs here, or the client side and the server side, are sort of my pride and joy. These are 2 things I've worked on the most. I've worked on a lot of projects, but this was a new concept for me when I was doing it. I have everything's one page. I'm using Express as a framework, and I only have my one page right here, chat.html. I would even like to split this up into multiple pages if possible. But I think that this is a good example of how I can break down a problem and design a solution and actually code from start to finish and end up with a working product. So the next thing that I'll review is my project that's gonna showcase my algorithms and data structures knowledge. So this is a program, binary search tree, that creates a binary tree and loads in a .csv file full of bit information. And this was a project that we worked on in my data structures and algorithms class. And this was my favorite project. So I love working with binary trees. So you'll see here what we do is we first define 2 structs. one for a bid object, which has a bid ID, title, fund, and amount, and then a node struct that has bid information in it, a bid, and then has a pointer to a right child and a left child. Just like any binary search tree, each leaf has the possibility of having a left child and a right child. And then we define the class for binary search tree. And what we have in the binary search tree namespace, we have the default constructor and destructor. We have in order, which will order the tree. It will print out the tree in order of, in this case, ID, bid ID. We have insert bid, which will allow you to enter bid information, and it will insert it in the proper location on the binary search tree. We have remove, which will allow you to enter a bid and will remove the bid with that bid ID from the search tree. And there's a lot more logic here, because then you have to shift any other leaves on the tree. We have the function here to search for a bid, given a bid ID. And we have add node and in order, again, which is just similar to the in order function up here. And then, continuing, we have static methods. We have display bid, which will display the actual bid, which is called inside the search. And then load bids, which actually loads our bids from the CSV file, and one by one calls the BST insert function to insert them into the tree. And then string to double here, and int main. We're getting our arguments. We load our bid file, and we give a menu, and we allow them to enter a choice, and so on and so forth. So this code, since the end of the class, when I run it, I get this output. And when I load the bids, it will load the bids and tell me how long it took to do so. And then I want to display all bids. It will display. But it throws an error. And this is something that it didn't do before. So what I would like to do, first and foremost, is fix that error so that I can actually work with this. But as far as the code review goes, let's look at the structure. So formatting-wise, the code has proper indentation all the way through. The naming is very meticulous. Everything's unique. The only thing I can point out as far as naming issues are I have a private in order function and I have a public in order function. The only difference, other than the node parameter, is the I in is capitalized and lowercase. So this is something I want to look at and see what the difference is and see if I can get rid of one. If not, changing the name to represent what it actually is. So each line, there are no overly long lines. Everything's kept short and readable. It's all within the code window. We have consistent formatting throughout. It performs as required, and it properly implements all the planning that we had. So I was given a lot of this code in our project, and we had to fill in the blanks per se. And by the end of it, I ended up with a working program. I'm thinking that's just a link error that's not allowing me to continue through with my code. So when it comes to the structure, the one thing that I've been looking at recently that I want to try and tackle is moving this binary search tree. So I don't see a real reason why I shouldn't be able to move this binary search tree to its own, let's say header file and own its own set of CPP files and actually just include it into this file. The only thing that's really holding me back is these struct nodes and struct bids, which I could just move to their own headers also. So that's the first, right off the bat, that's one thing I would like to do to clean this up a little bit. It will get rid of all these binary search tree methods or functions, and it will essentially take out 250 lines of code and just make this file only have to do with the logic of the program and not the binary search tree itself. So another thing is there's no right here, like I have a test, right? There's some tests in here that I have never removed. So that's one thing that I want to go back and do. But you'll see, I have at the beginning of every function some descriptive comments that will explain what it is and what it does for every single function. I would like to comment inside of the functions. I want to sort of go through and say, well, what is this try, catch, block, catching, and what's it trying to do, right? I want to add in some comments that would explain that while cleaning up any of the old tests that I can get rid of. So for this, I used proper storage for everything. There wasn't a whole lot of memory allocation, but I think that my binary search tree shows that proper storage was used. I think that binary search tree for something like this is definitely something that improves the program, that makes it quicker and more effective. So when it comes to documentation, again, comments are there, but they're inadequate. I would definitely like to add some more in there. When it comes to this program, what I would like to do is actually create a GUI for this. I've already been looking into Qt Creator, which has an open source version that I can use to create a GUI for this. Because doing everything by the command line can be complicated, and actually seeing data and being able to click on data and open different files is much more usable, right? So that's what I would like to do with this code. I want to clean up the comments. I would like to check out those two in order functions and see if they could be combined. I want to add in comments, and I want to create a GUI, and that's something I've already been undertaking. So I'm confident I can get it done effectively and appropriately. When it comes to showing my skills with databases, I'm going to also use my D20Chat program. So, like I said before, my D20Chat program is specifically created with tabletop gamers in mind to actually make communications easier between them and the game manager. So, on the server side, I have an instance of MySQL running, and I have an npm installed through Node that will allow me to interface with it through MySQL. And as you can see here, I have, when the server started, I created a connection, and again, I actually connect with that connection. And throughout, I am constantly running queries. And I am actually just putting values right into my SQL statements. So one of the things that you have to be careful for when it comes, when it comes to using SQL on a server like this is actually just injecting values. So just looking at this, right, I'm not sure whether or not these are actually escaped, whether I check for certain characters. So this opens me up to SQL injection pretty bad. And there is a way to actually put placeholders here and add values into placeholders and actually just replace the values, and it will take some of the escaping out of the equation. So, I have no comments here when it comes to any of my comments. But my formatting is fantastic. I'm using the proper SQL statements insert into the table chars, these columns, these values, and I'm putting the values in there, and I'm checking for errors. In this case, it's a callback, so I call back the result. And the whole document, I am deleting things from tables. I am checking to see if emails exist in the users table. I'm checking to see if that person's password is the same. Checking all that, and they all work. I've tested all of them. I've worked on all of them, but they could use some security updates. Like, again, I'm just putting the socket user ID in there as socket variable, which again isn't escaped. So it's very easy for someone to come in and just inject SQL. And that's something I haven't even tested. I don't have any unit tests on the server side. So I think in order to make this code more secure, I think it's in my best interest to add unit tests for this. There are a lot of npm packages I can install that will allow me to write unit tests, and then once I've run this for the first time up here with like my connection, I could run the actual tests and throw some sort of error. I could even have it text my phone or send me an email if it fails. Or I could intermittently check whenever someone logs in, I could have it then check to make sure the server's still running. Things like that. So those kinds of safeguards would be something that I should add. And I will add, just whether or not I'll do it for this project depends on the time frame. When it comes to databases, my main goal here is to switch over to MongoDB. So at the time, all I knew how to use was SQL. I've used MySQL and I use SQLite for Android applications, but when I created this, I had no idea how to use Mongo. I had heard of it. I knew it was in a lot of ways more secure. It's faster. And especially for a messaging app that has the possibility of having multiple users passing tons of information back and forth, it's probably the best thing to do. So my plan here is not only do I want to add in comments that will describe each actual query that's going on, and not only do I want to add in, see right here we have the kind of replacement with question marks, right, where you put a question mark and just it will inject this into it. This is much more secure. I want to do this for all of my SQL statements, even for these down here for my values. And it's very easy. So what I want to do is I want to clean up my comments. I want to add some comments into my SQL statements. And I want to actually have that kind of injection for all of my statements to make them a little more secure. And what I want to do is I want to take this from using MySQL to MongoDB, which is a big undertaking, but I believe I could do it. I believe it can be done in this. So another one of the things that I will have to do is every time I run a statement, there's the possibility for it to throw an error. And in all my statements, I have if error, and I will either call back the error, where I will check for it and print it, or in other situations, let's find one that isn't in a callback. We have right here, if error, throw error. I want to change all of my callbacks that call back my error to this. What this will do is this will actually just throw an error on the server, which makes everything way easier and easier to track. Whereas if sometimes I'm passing an error back and then checking for an error, it gets complicated. So I want to do that here. And one of the things that's going to happen when I switch over to MongoDB is it's going to become very, very important for me to then create functions to do all my basic, adding my retrieving documents, things like that. So I'll have to add some functions in here. But as far as the code goes to the SQL, it's very clean. It's something that I planned a lot. The tables themselves were diagrammed, and I will have to upload a picture onto the GitHub page because I did it in a notebook. But I'll have to upload that. It was all diagrammed. It was all planned out beforehand. I haven't had to add in any fields into my tables. I haven't had to do anything like that. So it's worked out for me pretty well. Everything's been pretty solid. And my format's pretty good. I just think that it's a matter of I would like to actually add in some comments explaining what's going on, and I would like to switch the whole thing over to MongoDB. Like I said, it's a big undertaking, but it can definitely be done. And I think these three things, once I'm done, will definitely show my skills in software engineering and design. They'll show my skills in working with databases, and they'll show my skills in data structures and algorithms.